Good evening. So, titled this, Which Wolf Am I Feeding? It seemed like a playful way to enter into what I wanted to discuss tonight. So, give the context of this in case a viewer doesn't know. I'll just read this story. This is very quick. One evening, an elderly Cherokee brave told his grandson about a battle that goes on inside people. "My dear one, the battle between two wolves is inside us all. One is evil. It is anger, envy, jealousy, sorrow, regret, greed, arrogance, self-pity, guilt, resentment, inferiority, lies, false pride, superiority, and ego. The other is good. It is joy, peace, love, hope, serenity, humility, kindness, benevolence, empathy, generosity, truth, compassion, and faith." The grandson thought about it for a moment and then asked his grandfather, "Which wolf wins?" The old Cherokee replied, "The one you feed." So, I don't actually know if it's an old Cherokee story or not, but that's how it usually gets attributed. So, a lot of my attention today went into writing a piece. And depending on how it comes together, I may eventually put it on my blog. I was originally going to post it to a private network, but I may make it more widely available. In some sense, using a mythic framework, I'm talking about the nature of the experience of time and essentially the interplay of time, death, and free will. This has been a pretty central question cluster for me. A lot of the challenge that I've been experiencing in writing this piece has had the same kind of flavor as me showing up for these live streams. I'm starting to notice this general discipline question, which is essentially, where am I coming from? Am I trying to affect my audience? Am I trying to yank on them or push them in some way? Or am I showing up and speaking because that is the energy that wants to come through? When I first encountered this kind of language and way of framing it, I found it very annoying because, like, well, how do I tell? When I ask that question, I seem to drift away from doing the right thing. Keep feeding the wrong wolf. Feeding the wolf of egoism and wanting attention and, this is hard and people should like me. Like the side of me that every time I write a response to some kind of social media, I keep wanting to check back and see, did they reply? Did they like it? Am I getting admiration and appreciation for the magnificence of what I have to offer? That gives me value. And so this way that I've built in this habit of getting admiration, appreciation, gratitude as my source of value, and so trying to shape myself to create those things, which on the surface doesn't sound too bad, but it means that I need those things and I start to drift in the direction of manipulating people in order to get them. It's no different through writing than it is through speaking. Like the nature of the experience is different because I'm tracking my words and I'm much more in my head, a lot more in my head. In these videos, it's actually fairly easy for me to check to see, what am I doing with my eyes? Am I actually seeing the camera I'm looking at, or am I just lost in thought? That's pretty straightforward. But when I'm writing, I need to be a little lost in thought. I'm constructing the words, I'm feeling out a lot of the energies. I'm doing a pretty complicated inner alchemical thing to take an entire feeling field and compress it into an essay that has the right flow, that conveys the right feeling. But I'm now discovering a new edge. It's not totally new, but it seems really important, really relevant, of when I'm writing, am I writing from my understanding, or am I writing from the frequency I want to let speak? So the reason I'm talking about time and death and choice is because it's anchoring me in and letting me talk directly about what it feels like for me to anchor in stillness. I've come to notice more and more, especially over the last few days. This has been building for quite some time. Noticing this way in which I lead with my mind, I trust my mind to take control of everything. And my mind isn't where I ground out knowing. My mind grows from knowing. I'm talking about the place in me from which, when I play with, like, who was that character in the show that I watched with my family last night? That was Hercule Poirot. Mom really likes Agatha Christie mysteries, and we pulled up an old one I had not seen before. Evil Under the Sun. So there's this, when I call that up, I know whether what my mind said is the answer to my question. I can tell. Yeah, it's true. We watched that video last night. It's possible for me to be fooled, I suppose. But there's a groundedness in the experience itself. My mind is pointing out to me the ways in which analytic minds that are watching this will object to that example, and I feel some temptation to clarify, and in that I feel a little torn. But I see what I want to do about it. If you're in a bit of a tizzy right now about, what do you mean? Like, I think that's not knowing, that's like blah, 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 blah. I would invite you to slow down and breathe and track what you think I meant and maybe what I should have meant. What is the truest thing that is near what I said? Don't ask your mind, just look. So I'm noticing more and more this grounding in a kind of knowing that is beyond the mind. I want to talk about the mind here again. For those who have not seen the previous videos, I'm talking about this sort of inner computer that answers these questions. Answers questions of memory or questions of fact. What is the Pythagorean theorem? And I get these visuals. The thing that answers my questions when I put effort into them. And I find that the more time I spend in this vast stillness, the deeper and thicker my roots grow into it, like it's a dark soil. And then I find myself snapping between two modes. These are my two wolves. Okay. One is this vast stillness where my knowing is, what my knowing is. And the other is this habit set that is in my mind for all the chattering conclusions and thinking methods and ways of analyzing situations that keep. So the way that this showed up for me today in writing up my piece, I can see this whole mythic framework that does this. It's this beautiful interlocking bit. There's a sense of elegance to the theory that I see. Right? It's just really cool. There's something like 5 different angles from esoteric philosophy that all converge on a single point that suggests that a popular way of conceiving of one particular piece of esoteric thought is actually wrong. And making a shift just makes the whole thing incredibly elegant. It's absolutely beautiful. To be a little less vague in this context, in case you know something about esoteric philosophy, a little bit about the context of this, what I'm looking at is the kind of role that Saturn plays in Hermetic philosophy. There's a shift in the resonance of what Saturn is that turns out to be, for one thing, it's more historically consistent. Astrologers of 150 years ago, and before then as well, all the way back to the Hellenistic era, viewed it in a way that was more compatible with this shift. But there's also a part of it that is quite startling to a lot of people. But that shift just makes all of the different pieces of Hermetic philosophy just snap together. And I just find that so elegant. So the thing is that whole structure, the whole theory, I'm not going to go into the theory is not relevant for what I'm saying here. But the fact that there is one does matter. So that whole theory is mental. It is a mental framework. It's mental context. There's nothing inherently wrong with that. But the thing that I want to point at is more profound than and deeper than the mind. So the thing that I keep finding happening is while I'm writing, I keep getting excited and then talking about all of these theory bits. When I do that, I lose track of the feeling of the resonance, this other vision of Saturn that I want to encourage the reader to feel. Now, this is a little bit like the difference between if I have a theory of grief and talk about, okay, so grief is a kind of computation that the mind does in order to update on reality being more uncomfortable than the previous world model had. And that update has these kinds of properties and yada, yada, yada. There's a way where even if I'm right, what I'm saying from that energetic space isn't connected to what matters about the theory. So what I'm saying in the content of the theory can't matter. It has no roots in the material world. It cannot matter. As opposed to an angle where I prioritize recognizing the feeling of sorrow. The invitation to stillness, the tiredness, and the pain. From there, from here, it makes more sense to be able to talk about what this is. What is grief? It's not just a theory, it's a lived experience. So what I keep noticing is that I keep having a kind of choice. Which wolf do I feed? It doesn't feel on the inside like a choice between an evil wolf and a good wolf. Often it doesn't even feel like a choice at all. It feels like I am sometimes just lost because I'm buzzing in thought. And the choice is to keep buzzing in thought and keep fueling that spinning, versus to recognize that if I am spinning and I am trying to find an answer, the answer will always root in knowing. So if I'm not rooted in knowing, all of this thought will never matter, because here is the material with which the mattering happens. But that's a thought, that's an analysis. I can have a mental model of that. There's a different move, a very specific move that is stepping into the stillness. So I can't choose to stay in the stillness. But I can choose to try to stay in the stillness as much as I can, to grow those roots deeply, and to recognize that the answer to my mental emotional befuddlement is not in more mental emotional befuddlement, but is instead in so I keep finding, which means a wonderful extension about how in these videos I've been practicing showing up and trying to come more and more from this rooted place. I had different descriptions before, mostly in terms of negatives. There's something to be said about the negatives in terms of shaping funny incentives. But, that's a different topic. In this business of rooting, every thought is connected to the truth of the here and now, not as an abstraction, but as a lived experience. The here and now is first. And discovering the way in which that applies to my writing as well. Am I feeling the resonance that I want to speak? And there's a subtle point of, am I feeling that resonance in order to make the words happen? Or am I grounding in my knowing and then doing what I know makes sense, even if that means scrapping the piece of writing? It's so tempting because of how I normally work to create mental rules. But part of the whole point of this is that I'm not leading with my mind anymore. Well, I still am to large chunks, to large relevant extents. But there's this continual work that I can see. It's not producing fruit yet, but it's becoming stable. I can reliably choose to feed the right wolf. I don't constantly feed the right wolf, but if I ask myself, which wolf am I feeding? I know which one I want to feed. So I bring that attention. I bring that intention. It seems like that produces the right kind of thing. It's also producing some pretty intense shifts in my subconscious mind. don't want to go into that just yet. Just haven't quite nailed all down enough to be able to say it. And more to the point, I don't want to have multiple topics jammed into one chat here. And slowly figuring out how to make videos that are less than an hour long. Well, so I feel pretty complete. Thank you for listening.